At the most lavish gala the city had ever seen, every powerful man in the room was fighting for the attention of one woman. Scarlett Hayes. Cold. Untouchable. Worth more than most of them combined. Then she stood up, lifted her glass, and publicly rejected every single one of them. The real shock came next. She walked straight past the billionaires, past the senators, past the diamond rings waiting in velvet boxes, and stopped in front of a quiet man in a worn gray jacket. "You," she said. "You're the only one I choose." The Hayes estate sat on a hill above the city behind black iron gates that only opened for invited names. Inside Scarlett, Hayes moved through a drawing room lined with marble and old oil paintings, checking the final details for the evening. The caterers called her ma'am. The florists called her ma'am. Everyone in her life had been calling her ma'am since she turned 22 and inherited the company her father had spent 40 years building. At 29, she was already considered one of the youngest self-running heiresses in the country. Hayes Holdings had doubled in value under her control. Magazines called her brilliant. Society columns called her cold. She had stopped reading either a long time ago. Her mother had died young. Her father had raised her with 2 rules. Trust numbers. Never trust a man who smiles before he negotiates. She had kept both rules without thinking about them, the same way other people kept a heartbeat. Her days were long and clean. Morning briefings, afternoon meetings. Evenings at events, she did not enjoy talking to people she did not trust. She owned 4 properties and a private jet and a staff of 12, and she slept alone in every one of the properties. She had stopped noticing that a long time ago as well. Her assistant walked beside her tablet in hand, reading names. Mr. Ashford confirmed his attendance. The senator confirmed. The Whitmore brothers confirmed. All 3 of them, ma'am. Scarlett nodded without stopping. She already knew why each of them had confirmed. They had been confirming for almost 2 years. Every gala, every charity dinner, every weekend event at the Hayes estate carried the same quiet competition beneath it. Men came with flowers. Men came with investment proposals disguised as conversation. Men came with rehearsed stories about their families and their cars and their vacation houses in Aspen. None of them ever asked her what she thought about anything that was not money. Gregory Ashford was the loudest of them. He was 35, old money wealthy, and believed the match between his family and hers had been written in some invisible book the day they were both born. He called twice a week. He sent wine she had not asked for. Scarlett tolerated him because her board liked him. She did not like him. She stopped at the tall window overlooking the back garden, where workers were still assembling the outdoor stage. A man in a gray jacket stood on a ladder, adjusting one of the lighting rigs. He was calm in a way that did not match the panic of everyone else setting up. He worked alone. He did not look toward the house, not once in the entire time she watched him. By 8 o'clock, the estate was full. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers brought in from the city, and the sound of a string quartet drifted through every open door. Scarlett stood near the staircase in a deep black gown, and the men arrived like they had been waiting at the gate for hours. Gregory reached her first. He kissed the back of her hand, told her she looked incredible, and immediately began describing his newest acquisition in Connecticut. She gave him the same polite half-smile she had been giving him since she was 25. He took it as encouragement. He always did. Senator Whitmore came next. Then his brother. Then a man from a Boston firm whose name she had already forgotten. Each one brought the same opening. Each one worked their way toward the same point. Hayes Holdings. Her late father's seat on the board of 3 other companies. Her personal assets. Her name. Never her. At one point during dinner, a younger cousin of the Whitmores leaned in and asked her what her target margin was for the next fiscal year. He thought it was charming. He thought it was flirting. She answered the number and watched his eyes light up, and she felt the same small flat closing inside her chest that she felt at every table like this. Her oldest friend, Vivian Carter, found her near the bar an hour in. Vivian was the only person in that room who had known Scarlett since boarding school, before the inheritance, before the cold column inches. She slid a glass of water into Scarlett's hand, instead of champagne, because she knew. 3 marriage proposals before dessert, Vivian said quietly. That might be a new record for you. Scarlett glanced at the crowd. None of them see me, Vivian. They see the company. Vivian held her gaze a beat too long before looking away, something unspoken, passing across her face, that Scarlett did not catch. A side door opened near the service hallway, and a man in the same gray jacket from earlier walked through carrying a toolbox. One of the event coordinators hurried to meet him, gesturing toward a breaker panel that had been cutting out the stage lights. The man listened, nodded once, and followed her without a word. Scarlett watched him move through the edge of the room. Unlike every other man there, he did not once look in her direction. He did not scan the crowd for her. He did not try to place himself closer to where she was standing. He simply went where he had been asked to go and did the work. "Who is that?" she asked. Vivian glanced over. "Contractor. Bennett, I think. They brought him in because the main electrician canceled." "Why?" Scarlett did not answer. She was still watching the way the man crouched beside the panel, the way his sleeves were pushed up to the elbow, the way he did not perform for anyone in the room. An hour later, she stepped out onto the quieter side veranda, and he was there again, packing the last of his tools into a canvas bag. He glanced up when he heard her heels on the stone, then returned to what he was doing. No straightening, no sudden attention. Just a short, polite nod like she was any guest who had wandered out for air. "You fixed the panel," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She stepped a little closer into the edge of the light. "Noah, isn't it?" He looked up again a little longer this time, as if trying to figure out how she knew his name. "Noah Bennett." "Can I offer you a drink before you go, Noah? Something from inside?" "No, thank you. I have a drive ahead. I can send a car." He did not look up this time. "I have a truck. It gets me where I need to go." She was not used to being told no twice in the same minute. Inside the ballroom, men were pouring themselves into her attention, like water, trying to fill a shape. Out here, this man would not even take a glass. He did not seem rude. He did not seem impressed. He simply did not need anything from her, and that alone made him stranger than every person she had spoken to all night. "You know who I am," she said. It was not a question. "I know whose house I'm working in," he answered. "That's different." She studied him. There was dust on his jacket sleeve and a small cut healing on the back of his hand. He looked tired in a steady, ordinary way, the kind of tired that came from years, not from nights. "Most people inside would give a lot for 5 minutes with me," she said. Noah zipped his bag closed and stood up. "I'm not most people, ma'am, and I'm not trying to be." Something in the way he said it was final. Not proud, not sharp. Just a line he was not going to cross for her benefit, and he did not seem to care whether she liked it or not. She had met men who pretended to be unreachable as a strategy. Noah Bennett was not pretending. He was simply already somewhere else. He picked up the canvas bag and walked past her toward the service path, calm, unhurried, the same way he had worked. In that single moment, for the first time in longer than Scarlett could remember, she realized she was the one left standing there. She turned to watch him disappear around the corner of the house. Behind her, through the glass doors, Gregory Ashford was laughing too loudly at something, a fresh drink in his hand, his eyes already searching the room for her. She walked back inside 15 minutes later, and the ballroom looked different. The same chandeliers, the same music, the same men in the same suits, with the same rehearsed smiles. It was as if someone had turned up the volume on something she had trained herself not to hear. Every conversation around her was a transaction. Every compliment was an opening offer. She had lived inside it so long she had forgotten there was an outside. Gregory found her near the terrace doors. "Where did you disappear to?" he asked, smiling as if he had any right to the answer. "Air," she said. I needed air. He slid his hand toward her elbow, the way he always did, a small ownership gesture dressed up as care. After 2 full years of tolerating it, she stepped back from it. His smile cracked for half a second before he rebuilt it. Everything all right, Scarlett? Yes, she said. But her eyes were already on the service path outside the glass, where a gray jacket had disappeared into the dark. That night, after the last guest had left, and the house had quieted, and the staff had gone to bed, Scarlett stood alone in her study with a list in her hand. A list of every name that had been passed to her as a possible match in the last 2 years. She looked at it for a long time. Then she opened the drawer and dropped it inside. She did not throw it out. Not yet. But something in her had started to consider names that were not on it. The story reached the society columns before the end of the following week. It was not printed as news. It was printed as a joke. A small item in a weekend gossip page mentioned that Scarlett Hayes had been seen lingering outside with a member of the service staff, and that perhaps America's coldest heiress was lowering her standards at last. The column did not name Noah Bennett. It did not need to. By Monday morning, everyone in her circle had already decided who it was. Vivian Carter called her before 9. Tell me you've seen it. Scarlett was already sitting at her desk, the paper folded beside her coffee. I've seen it. Gregory is furious, Scarlett. I heard it from 2 different people at brunch yesterday. He thinks you're humiliating him on purpose. I'm not married to Gregory. That's not what people in this city have been telling themselves for 2 years, and you know it. Scarlett did know it. She had allowed that story to exist because it had been convenient. It had kept quieter men at a distance and had kept her board comfortable. She had never corrected it. She was beginning to understand that silence in her world was the same as a signature. Gregory Ashford did not wait long to act on it. By Wednesday, a business associate of his had quietly pulled out of a minor joint venture with Hayes Holdings, citing timing. By Friday, 2 invitations Scarlett had been expecting for the following month did not arrive. None of it was large enough to hurt her. All of it was a message. Gregory was reminding her that the world she lived in had doors, and he knew where most of them were. What Scarlett did not know yet was that Gregory's pressure had already reached Noah. On the same Friday afternoon, Noah received a call from the general contractor who had hired him for the gala. The man was apologetic and tired in the way of someone delivering bad news he did not choose. 2 jobs pulled out on me this week, Noah. I can't keep you on the city rotation right now. It isn't about your work. Your work is fine. It's politics. Noah thanked him, hung up, and sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He lived in a narrow 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on the edge of the city, the kind of place where the radiator clicked all winter and the rent had gone up twice in the last 3 years. He paid his bills in cash. He had been saving for a newer truck to replace the one he was driving, which had more miles on it than he liked to think about. He already knew what losing the city rotation meant. A week later, a man in a dark suit he had never met before knocked on his door and offered him $20,000 in an envelope to stay out of Scarlett Hayes' life. Noah looked at the envelope on his table, then at the man. Tell whoever sent you I wasn't in her life to begin with. Scarlett heard about the offer 3 days later from Vivian, who had heard it from someone who worked in Gregory's office. Scarlett listened without moving. When the call ended, she sat at her desk and stared at the far wall for what felt like a long time. She had spent her adult life believing that the transactions in her world were distasteful but honest. Everyone wanted something. Everyone traded for it. That was the rule. She had never before watched that rule reach out and try to erase a person she barely knew simply because she had looked at him for too long. The Hayes Foundation Charity Gala was held 3 weeks later at the Whitmore Museum. It was the largest philanthropic event the family name hosted each year, and Scarlett had been co-chair since she was 26. There was no version of that night where she did not attend. She walked in on Gregory's arm because the photographs required it, and because her board had asked her politely to stop giving the papers reasons. She smiled for the cameras. She shook the right hands. She kept her champagne glass full and untouched. She had not expected to see Noah there. He was not a guest. He was on the side of a scaffold at the far end of the main hall, helping 2 other men reset a section of track lighting that had shorted out during setup. He was wearing the same gray jacket. He did not look at her when she walked in. He did not look at her when she crossed the room. He was working. The speeches began after dinner. Gregory rose halfway through, glass in hand, and made what was supposed to be a toast to the foundation. Somewhere in the middle of it, he veered. "Of course," he said, smiling at the room. "We all know our dear Scarlett has been entertaining some unusual company lately. A reminder, I suppose, that even the most refined taste can take a detour." Laughter rippled politely across the tables. A few heads turned to see how Scarlett would respond. Scarlett set her glass down and stood. The laughter thinned. "Since we're speaking plainly, Gregory, let me be plain as well." Her voice was even not raised. It did not need to be. "The man you are referring to has done more honest work in one afternoon in my home than most people in this room have done in a year. He took no favors from me. He took no money from you. I will not sit here and let his name be used as a punchline so that you can feel taller." The silence that followed was the real kind, not the polite kind. Gregory's smile stayed on his face, but his eyes went flat. He sat down slowly. Vivian, 2 seats away, kept her face perfectly still, but her hand tightened around the stem of her glass, and something in her chest she had been ignoring for 2 years began to wake. At the far end of the hall, Noah, halfway up the scaffold, had stopped working. Later, on the loading side of the museum where the catering trucks were parked, Scarlett found him coiling an extension cord into a neat loop. "You didn't need to do that for me," he said, without turning around. "I didn't do it for you." He set the cord down and faced her. The calm she remembered was still there, but there was something harder underneath it. Then why? Because he was wrong. Miss Hayes. Scarlett. Noah let that sit for a moment. "Scarlett, I am not a project for you." She opened her mouth. He went on before she could answer. "I know how your world works. I know what happens when someone like you takes an interest in someone like me. It becomes a story. The story becomes a lesson. The lesson ends, and I go back to where I started. Only now I'm in the papers. I already lost 2 weeks of work because of one conversation on your veranda. I'm not going to lose more because you wanted to prove a point at dinner. You think that's what I was doing. I think you don't know what you were doing. That's honest, not cruel." She felt the words land, and she could not argue with them because part of her did not know. Part of her had stood up in that hall because Gregory had crossed a line. Part of her had stood up because some small, stubborn thing in her had been waiting for an excuse to speak since the night of the first gala. She did not know which part had moved first. He turned back to the extension cord. "Go back inside, Scarlett. It's cold out here, and you're not dressed for it." She did not go. "If I don't do this again," she said, "if I don't make you part of a story, what then?" "Then we don't owe each other anything, which is fine by me." She stood in the cold for another few seconds, then walked back inside. After that night, she did not call him. He did not contact her. The story in the columns faded because Gregory wounded, and Careful pulled his dogs back and waited. Scarlett told herself that Noah had been right, that it was cleaner this way, that her life had been designed for people inside her gates, not outside them. She returned to her meetings. She returned to her briefings. She said yes to 3 events in a row that she would ordinarily have declined. What she did not expect was how much quieter her circle became. The invitations kept coming, but the warmth inside them had thinned. At a dinner in early November, she realized she was being seated farther from the head of the table than she had been in 5 years. At another, Gregory arrived with a younger woman on his arm and did not look at Scarlett once. It was not a public snub. It was the kind of private cold she had grown up watching her father end careers with. Noah, on his end, had lost more work. 2 of the city contractors who used to call him first had stopped calling. He took jobs further out in older neighborhoods, repairing what other people had broken and fixing what no one else wanted to fix. He did not tell anyone about the envelope. He did not tell anyone about the conversation at the museum. He did what he had always done. He went to work. He came home. He kept his door closed. On a Thursday in late November, he found himself on a ladder replacing a ceiling fixture in a retired teacher's house, and he realized he had not thought about Scarlett Hayes for 6 straight hours. He took that as good news and drove home. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Vivian Carter's voice was low and strange on the other end of the line. "Scarlett, there's something you need to hear. I'm not going to say it twice because I'm not proud of it." Scarlett was in her study. She set down her pen. "Say it once then." Vivian's voice was steady, but only by effort. "Gregory has been offering people things for 6 months, before the first gala, before Noah. Promotions, introductions, board seats, quiet money, in exchange for keeping you close to him and away from anyone else. I know, because he offered me something 2 summers ago. I took it, Scarlett. I took it, and I have carried it every day since, and I told myself 100 different lies about why." The room around Scarlett went very quiet. She could hear the old clock on the mantel. She could hear her own breath. She could hear the small sound of something she had trusted for 15 years coming apart in her hand. "Why are you telling me now?" she said. "Because after the museum I watched you stand up for a man you barely knew, and I realized no one has ever stood up for you like that. Not me. Not your father. Not one of them. And you don't know. You're walking around not knowing. I couldn't keep sitting at tables with you while that was still true." Scarlett did not answer. She hung up the phone carefully, as if it were made of glass. She sat alone in the study until the light changed across the floor. She thought about every dinner, every compliment, every careful arrangement of seats, every call from Gregory that had arrived exactly when she felt lonely enough to answer. That afternoon, she understood something she had not let herself understand in all her adult life. The world she had inherited had never belonged to her. It had been rented around her by someone else at a price she had never been told. She picked up her phone to call Noah, and then she set it back down. Somewhere on the other side of the city, Noah Bennett was locking up a job site for the night. He had decided 2 weeks earlier to stop checking the news for her name. He had decided 1 week earlier that whatever had begun outside that ballroom was over, and that people like him and people like her were not meant to end up in the same room for very long. Neither of them called the other that night. It felt to both of them like the end of something that had barely started. The days that followed Vivian's call were the quietest of Scarlett's adult life. She kept her meetings. She signed what needed signing. She went home at night to a house that had felt for years like a well-run headquarters, and she noticed how little of it actually belonged to her. The paintings had been her father's. The china had been her mother's. The long dining table had been chosen by a designer she had never met. Even the view from the upstairs window had been negotiated for once by someone else. She did not sleep well. She would sit at the study desk at 2 in the morning with the lamp on and go through old calendars, old messages, old transfers. She found the shape of Gregory's hand in almost all of it, the careful pattern of someone who had been steering a life while pretending to walk beside it. She was not devastated. She was something worse than devastated. She was embarrassed for her father's rules, for her own certainty, for the way she had mistaken surveillance for protection. On the other side of the city, Noah was working through his own version of the same silence. He had told himself on the drive home from the museum that the story was over, and he had believed it for about a week. After that, it kept coming back in small, unwanted ways. The shape of a gray coat in a crosswalk, the sound of a woman laughing the way she had laughed outside that ballroom once before she caught herself. He was a practical man. He did not believe that practical men were allowed to miss people they barely knew. He was missing her anyway. He sat at his kitchen table one night with a cup of coffee going cold in front of him and admitted to the empty room that pride was a thin blanket. He had turned down her car. He had turned down Gregory's money. He had told her in plain daylight that she did not know what she was doing. He had meant all of it. None of it had made him stop thinking about her. He did not know what to do with that. He was not built for wanting things he could not earn. Scarlett drove herself to Noah's neighborhood on a Saturday in early December. She did not bring a car service. She did not bring Vivian. She wore a plain coat she had owned since college, and flats instead of heels. And she parked her own car 2 blocks from the hardware store on the corner because the spaces in front were full. She walked the rest of the way. She had not walked a city street alone in almost 4 years. She climbed the narrow staircase above the shop and knocked on the door at the top. When Noah opened it, he was holding a wrench in one hand and wearing a flannel shirt with a coffee stain on the cuff. He looked at her for a long moment without moving. "Scarlett, I'm not here to make you part of a story," she said. "I'm here because I owe you a conversation I should have had a long time ago. If you want me to leave, I'll leave. I won't come back." He stepped aside and let her in. The apartment was small and clean and warm. A worn couch, a table with 2 chairs, a window that looked out at a brick wall and a piece of sky. She sat in one of the chairs. He sat in the other. He did not offer her anything. She was grateful for that. She told him about Gregory, about the 6 months of quiet arrangements, about Vivian's call. She told him that she had spent a long time confusing being watched with being loved, and that she had not understood, until recently, how different those 2 things were. She told him she wasn't asking him to be anything, and that she wasn't here to save him, or to be saved. "I came," she said, "because in all my life I have never once sat down and spoken to another person honestly. I chose you because you're the only person I've met who has no reason to lie to me. That is all. I don't need an answer." Noah looked at her for a long time. The calm she remembered was still there, but it had changed. It was not distance anymore. It was attention. "When I told you outside that I wasn't most people," he said, "I meant it. And when I told you at the museum that I wasn't a project, I meant that too. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to protect something I could not afford to lose. I know. What I didn't tell you," he went on, "was that I thought about you every day after that. I'm not proud of it. I'm telling you because you drove across a city in a plain coat to be honest with me, and I owe you the same." She did not answer right away. She did not need to. "I don't want you to come into my world, Noah. I don't even know if I want that world anymore. I don't want you to come into mine either," he said. "It's too small for who you are, and I don't want to watch you try to shrink." "Then what?" He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Then we find out if there's anywhere we can stand. That isn't either one." She nodded. It was the first thing anyone had offered her in years that was not a trade. They did not call it a relationship at first. They called it coffee on Tuesdays. Then dinner at a small place neither of them had been to before, chosen on purpose, because it did not belong to anyone's history. She did not bring him to galas. He did not take her to job sites. They spent a long winter and a slow spring learning each other in the in-between places, the quiet bookstores, the park benches, the diners that stayed open past midnight. Scarlett sold the estate on the hill that following spring. She kept the company. She restructured the board and removed 2 of the names her father had trusted most. Gregory Ashford tried once to schedule a meeting with her through a mutual associate. The meeting was declined in a single sentence, and after that he stopped appearing in her calendar and eventually in her circle. Vivian came back slowly in small, honest pieces. Scarlett let her. Noah kept his apartment above the hardware store for another year before he moved on his own terms to a slightly larger place closer to the work he was building into a proper, small business. Scarlett invested in none of it. He had not asked, and she had not offered. What they built in the middle in a city they had both always lived in and had never really shared until now. On a quiet evening in the following October, almost a year to the day after the first gala, they stood together on a small rooftop in a neighborhood neither of them had grown up in, looking at a skyline that no longer belonged to either of their old lives. Someone down on the street was playing music from a parked car. Scarlett leaned against the railing and felt after so many years of performing a life that she was finally standing somewhere she had chosen. Money can buy attention. It can fill a ballroom. It can print a name in the society pages and keep it there for a generation. It cannot buy the one thing Scarlett Hayes spent her whole life pretending she did not need. Respect that is not negotiated. Affection that is not arranged. A person who chooses you when there is nothing left to gain by choosing you. A real relationship is not built on wealth, status, or advantage. It is built on honesty, on self-respect, and on the quiet courage to see another human being for who they actually are. Everything else is decoration, and decoration, no matter how expensive, will never keep anyone warm.